People who hire people, what are some lies that you have caught on someone's resume? Serious. My favorite one was a guy that put down some fake shell company name that was impossible to find research as his previous employer. He did this to mask the fact that he was coding video players and CMS for a gay P site. Had a good laugh when we finally tracked down the breadcrumbs and figured it out. 1000% hired him. He had exactly the experience we were looking for. The P part, which I'm sure he was trying to hide for various reasons, meant nothing to us. The one time lying worked out for the guy. Languages would be the biggest. A couple of times. If there is one thing you never, ever lie about or exaggerate on a CV is the languages you speak. I interviewed a 40-year-old who claimed to be a Vietnam vet. One applicant claimed to have been a team leader at a local factory for 10 years. The place had only been open for 7, and I knew they didn't have team leaders. It was the owner boss, and everybody working independently. Saw that one a few months ago. Candidate lied about job title and length of time in the role. Pretty easy to catch as years ago, I had worked at that company. Never noticed her on our 5-person staff. Someone actually stated he worked in my company for 3 years. He didn't. Being partway through a Java class is not 1 year experience programming in Java. I had a guy who wrote that he was a higher level swimmer on his resume. That had absolutely nothing to do with the job, but I asked him about it since my sister competed at the same club he claimed to be part of. As his story unraveled, he had the grace to admit that he'd fudged it, but that was the end of his candidacy. It didn't do anything to improve his application, and it ended up ruining him. Let that be a lesson, kids. Don't lie on your applications. Depends on the level. I once interviewed an accounting clerk who had on her resume that she handled payroll at her last position. My boss had interviewed her first and he was super excited to hire her. I talked to her for a few minutes and had her describe her typical daily processes. I just asked and had her talk open-endedly. I was highly suspicious of her claim. Payroll is not that easy. Sure enough, her role in payroll was to make an Excel spreadsheet with everyone's name on it and how many hours they had worked and then email it somewhere. I swore she was high, but my boss wanted her hired anyway. He claimed he was a man of action. She lasted 5 or 6 days until termination because she stopped showing up after 3 days. Not involved in hiring in my current position, but back when I worked at DirecTV years ago, I had an application from someone in our TRI group applying into a new group I had helped start 6 months earlier. He talked up his stats, how he had been a leader on his team, and for more than a year he had been the account manager lead agent, etc., on his team. I knew this was bulls because he had used to be one of my agents, and that was my position up until the day I moved to the new group. And another rep I had worked with took my position. I let him get to the interview phase just to see how he explained it, and he must have forgotten who I was, because he owned the lie through the whole interview. I had a guy come in for a tech screen. He looked great on paper, but when we quizzed him on expertise with a software package mentioned on his resume, he became extremely confused. After some back and forth, we mutually figured out that the headhunter that sent us his paperwork had done a major chop job on his resume. It was definitely for him. It covered his entire career, had the right contact info, etc. But the headhunter had added employers, exaggerated expertise, listed skills he didn't have, and generally turned it from a good resume to a huge set of lies. So we had him call the headhunter on speakerphone and ask her why she had done that. She said something like, "Oh, honey, everybody needs a little help on paper," and then explained that she knew they needed someone with that skill set, so she just fibbed a little to get your foot in the door. And when he said he was scared he'd be asked to use that software package, he said, "You've got 2 weeks before you start, right? Just look stuff up in the internet." That's when our VP of Human Resources spoke up, told her she'd been on speakerphone all that time, introduced himself and everyone in the room, and said we'd be hiring the dude. He teched out awesome despite all the lies, and if she even hinted about a placement fee, we'd all be at the state police's fraud division the next day, signing affidavits about the content of the conversation we just listened to. Short but poignant silence ensued, followed by the click of a phone disconnecting. Hired the dude. He was awesome. Stayed with us for 3 or 4 years and got snapped up by a client, and it didn't cost us a cent. That's quite awesome. Good for that dude that it worked out even though he was in a crappy situation. I would have totally called the cops on that woman either way, but I definitely would have made sure that guy didn't get in any crap though. When we left our last job to start our own business, the university asked us to help them read through resumes to find replacements. This was in Korea. While I don't remember lies, I do remember that it was shocking how many people had unprofessional email addresses. Seriously, you had people who put crap like 6General6969 or Monkeyman84 on their resume to apply to be a university teacher. Even if your name is Dave Johnson and Dave Johnson at Gmail is gone, Dave Johnson 5758 is better than Beglifting Dude or whatever. Don't lie about your education. It can easily be verified. Except when you're Mike Ross from Suits. Honestly though, I can see people being dumb enough to actually do that. Just last week I was asked to vet a guy going for a CEO position. Turns out he was a complete con man. I found an online acting profile where he had been an extra in Baywatch no less, and where he specified his speciality as performing as an executive. CV, expert knowledge of Solaris, FreeBSD, Debian, Red Hat. Could you, at a high level, talk about the major differences between BSD and Linux-based operating systems? Well, I've not really used all of them, right? So just talk me through the main differences between the BSD-based systems and Linux-based systems you have used. We use a Linux which was written entirely in-house. I see. Oh, wow. If he wrote an entire new distro of Linux, and it worked well enough for enterprise deployment, you should have hired him that second. This should be saved for best hiring moments, not worst. A few years back, I had the misfortune of interviewing a fellow for a role in a film shoot. Although the production technically had a human resources professional in charge of screening resumes, they were far better versed in the recruiting process than they were in what qualifications were necessary for the job. As a result, less than half an hour before I was supposed to meet with the man in question, I was handed a document that would have made most pathological liars blush. According to the resume, my interviewee had been an uncredited consultant on over 100 feature films. While there certainly are cases in which a given worker goes uncredited, it has even happened to me. The sheer magnitude of the fellow's claim went well beyond the realm of believability. Furthermore, the guy had listed quite a few alleged skills that seemed to suggest a less than complete knowledge of the industry. My favorite claim was that he had expert level Apple box skills. For the record, an Apple box is literally a wooden box. That's it. There are a few different sizes, and they're used whenever something needs to be stacked on top of a box. I went ahead with the interview anyway, if only because I was curious about how the guy would back up his various claims. He turned out to be maybe 20 years old, which was far too young to have worked on many of the films that he had listed. When pressed, he explained that he had consulted on each of them by writing letters to the people involved in the productions, in which he outlined several suggestions on various things. Suffice to say, he didn't get the job, though I'm certain that he listed himself as an uncredited consultant on it, simply because he attended the interview. Should have made him stack Apple boxes. We were once going over the CV of an applicant and something about it seemed off. After a bit of investigation on Google, we found out that the entire CV was fake. Basically, he'd taken an example CV off the internet and changed one or two details to try and mask it. The nail in the coffin was when his current employer was a business which went bust 2 years before. We found all of this out while he was doing a preliminary interview downstairs. The follow-up interview was pretty funny, I'm told. Alas, I wasn't part of the team doing it. To be fair, in some circumstances defunct businesses can still have people working for them to wind them up. For example, Lehman Brothers still has a large staff. Several years ago, I was hired to do consulting work for a client. Part of my job was to get the project up and running quickly, but I was also tasked with interviewing the people who were candidates to take over my position after my contract ended. I interviewed a few people over the course of a few weeks with no luck. One day, I got a resume sent to me and I gave it a quick once over. It looked really familiar. So I went through my old emails and found the same resume from another candidate. Exact same companies, titles, dates, descriptions, etc. The names on the resumes were different and the formatting was completely different, so it wasn't as simple as just changing the name. Someone put a lot of effort into making a whole new resume that was the exact same as someone else's in content. I took both resumes to the manager, who called the recruiter. The recruiter apologized and claimed that it was a clerical error. You know, I use a recruiter and I could actually see this happening. They'll reformat and slice and splice my resume up, and when they send it to people, I think part of it is they want to highlight what is relevant. The other part is they don't want them to know how to contact me directly. They could have fricked up and slapped the wrong person's name on there while reformatting a resume. Someone claimed to have worked on enchantments. I called him out on it and he admitted it was a typo and he meant enhancements. Not a joke, a true story. One guy said he owned an apple farm in the province. The butthole probably didn't research first what makeup farm to invent, cause last time I checked, you can't grow apple in our country. Apples need to have frost in the spring or they won't flower. If they don't flower, no apples. I was interviewing a candidate for a job in the music department who claimed to have a music performance degree from Yale University. When I asked, "How did you like Woolsey Hall, Yale's principal concert hall with famous pipe organ?" he had no idea what I was talking about. That, in turn, promptly concluded our session. Had a guy claim he knew how to program and set up a CNC mill. Day 1, asked him to write a simple program and set up a mill. 3 hours in, it was pretty apparent he lied. He pretty much just left on his own. He thought he knew more than he did because of the place he worked before, but when he had to step outside of his comfort zone he was screwed. There was a time when that would have led to training. Did a lot of interviewing and tech screens at my old job, probably over 1k, but only hired a few, less than 10. A non-technical recruiter would collect resumes and send them to management T after an initial screen. Then as a senior engineer I would do their tech screen. Universally they would claim competence about technology they did not possess. This was always easy to flush out with just a few quick questions about whatever they put down. For example, claimed to be an expert on DNS but couldn't explain simple concepts about it. Or would claim to be expert on mail transport but couldn't describe a transaction. Another example would be someone claiming to be an experienced programmer but unable to give me a code example of how to count something, or articulate between a function or a constant. I am still surprised by how many people tried this. For people that didn't lie, they couldn't get past the no butthole rule. For example, an internal candidate did fine on the tech screen and follow-up interviews, but after the panel where he impressed everybody he told the most racist, sexist and homophobic jokes in the elevator ride down to the lobby. People lie about never having DUIs or being in prison. They don't realize that everything they've ever done shows up on their background check, no matter how long ago it happened. Not totally true. Background checks for me are hit or miss on if they catch the trouble I got into when I was a teenager. Mostly embellishment. You'll see things like implemented new company policies targeting maximum customer retention. In non-resume terms, that means instead of saying, "Have a nice day" when a customer left, I'd say, "Have an amazing day." People like to make their old tasks sound far more important than they were. That's because it's hard to play retail experience up as anything more than it is. You serve customers. Provide the best customer service you can. Employers want you to really sell yourself, and there just isn't a lot you can do to sell customer service as a position. I'm a recruiter, and we were interviewing another recruiter to potentially be on our team. My boss had done the initial interviews, and then asked a co-worker and me to interview the finalists. Since we were the 2 senior people on the team, we are in Alaska, and our boss manages us from Dallas. Anyway, she starts basically reciting her resume to us, when we both were sitting 5 feet away from her, each of us clearly holding her resume. Pro tip: don't do that. At one point, she mentions working for this one company as a contractor, and tells us that in addition to recruiting, she actually handled all of their HR functions. I said, "Oh, did you work closely with their HR manager?" "They don't have any HR people," she replied. "That's why I was there." I said, "Actually, I asked that question because their HR manager is a very good friend of mine. I had never seen anyone crap a brick before." Not a boss, but we recently got an apprentice in our office, like an intern, who never put on his criminal convictions form that he was lifted for threatening and aggressive behavior. He was fired within a week for getting the job under false pretenses. Related. I finally got around to making a company page on LinkedIn for my business. I saw how many people claimed to have worked for me over the past 5 years. No complete lies, but huge exaggerations. A former contract employee for a single 1-month project claimed he was a lead designer, fabricator and pattern maker. The dude glued together some wood and left before finishing his contract. Most of what I see is just people claiming you be an expert on something they're merely familiar with. I recently had a guy list Python as a known programming language. When I started talking to him about Python, he seemed clueless. He eventually told me the extent of his Python knowledge was writing a hello world program. Simple crap that's basically the first thing you learn. I was a server admin for a large environment, Windows and Exchange. We had received junior spots to troubleshoot things like file access, print queue creation, basically entry level. Had a guy say he just got his MCSE, and he was on our help desk as a desktop support guy. He was quite good too from what his tickets and customer feedback said. I asked him a few basics, which he nailed. Asked him a few harder questions. He got them generally right, and the ones he struggled with I just asked his thought process and walked through the solution together. Lastly, on a whim I tried to check his MCSE certificate number through Microsoft. Nothing. I figured he said he just got it, so it might not be available to search yet. We talked internally and decided he would be a great fit. During a small celebration lunch I joked with him about he can start when his MCSE posts. I didn't actually intend to look. He admitted the next day he didn't pass. He lost the potential offer. Kid was 23 and would have been making 85k. It's odd though, kind of a catch-22. We 100% looked at his resume because he had his MCSE, but we probably would have still looked at him even without it. I really hope he studied up and got a higher end job. No lies, but we did have an application from someone the manager staff dubbed Stat Rope Rita. Her name was Rita, and on the line where it asked if you've been arrested of any crimes she wrote Stat Rope. She was my girlfriend, bro. I wanted to have it framed but my store manager thought it would be in bad taste. Language. People lie constantly. If it says English, Korean and Russian is needed, and you say you know them, and I ask something you in Korean and you just nod your head, the interview ends there. Not on someone's resume, but we hired someone to be a basic serifsman construction worker for our company who listed that he could weld on his resume. We had him go out to do a simple job of welding some supports to a pipe so it would stay straight while concrete was poured. He was told to go get everything he needed to do this and he came back with a torch and a pair of sunglasses. I worked for a company that worked in partnership with CBSA, Canada Customs, and a criminal record was a no-no. I was doing an initial interview, after reading a clean resume, with a fellow over the phone and asked him if he had a record. He stated no, but the power of Google, he had a very unusual name BTW. Yeah, murder was his crime and that explained the gap in his work history. He was a serial purse snatcher who killed a woman during a snatch. I didn't hire him. We brought a contractor on where I work. Older guy, seemed competent. I had spent about a week training him when he runs into one of our engineers. The engineer recognized him and said hello, but the old guy adamantly refused to know him. The engineer insisted that they had been roommates in some corporate housing 4 or 5 years prior. The engineer persisted along the lines of, "Are you sure you didn't work with such and such?" Finally, the old guy snapped at the engineer and asked if he interrogated everyone like this. The next day, we received word that he had failed a background check conducted by one of our government customers and was let go. Sadly, I didn't get any more details than that. Had a guy leave a felony conviction off his application that was for kidnapping and forgery. We only caught him because he acted so weird we did a Google search. Friend of mine worked in the next office along from this guy who was an entitled, lazy, snide smartass. Then my friend left and moved literally halfway around the world and changed profession and became a recruiter. One of the first CVs to land on her desk was from the smartass. Turns out he had also moved halfway around the world and was looking for a new job. He'd lied on his CV about his experience and his previous employer, probably to cover up the poor references they would have given him. How's that for unlucky? Move round the world to escape your bad employment record in your hometown and end up sending your CV to someone who had worked in the next office back home and knew all about you. Said he was industrious, a hard worker with good people skills. These were lies. I work exclusively on an interim basis, so I'm often responsible for helping the board hire my replacement. The worst I saw was a person who had previously held a position for a former client of mine. She was grossly exaggerating her claims of size of the organization, number of direct reports, and personally generated revenue, like 3-4 times the actual amount. If I hadn't worked with this other company previously and known their actual numbers, I would have mistaken her for a good candidate. I actually received a resume from a former employee for a position I posted on Indeed. The candidate only worked for us about a month as an AP clerk and was let go. Her resume stated she worked at our company for 2 years as an accounting manager. Make sure if you're going to lie on your resume, do not apply for a position at said company you are lying about. The guy who hired me told me this one, so some backstory. I applied to a design engineer position. I got through the first interview fine and they asked would I mind coming back and spending half an hour just modeling up a quick part from a provided drawing. I assumed this was to determine who got the job out of a handful of people. Later, after I was hired, they explained that they didn't normally ask for proof of ability in interviews, but the last guy they hired for this position had come in completely unable to read 2D engineering drawings. Like, the first part he modeled was not just incredibly inaccurate, it was also back to front. This was after he was told in an interview he would largely be required to create models from 2D engineering drawings. I have been responsible for hiring in my company for almost 8 years, read many CVs and interviewed many candidates. Some examples. 1. Stating in his CV that his typing speed in English is 500 WPM. And nope, it was not a typo. He said he played the piano for many years and had fast fingers when I asked him about it in our interview. 2. Did not mention graduation year. Turned out he had dropped out of college in the first year and did not actually have a degree. 3. Claiming to be single but came to the interview wearing a wedding ring. She admitted lying about it in all her job applications to get more interview opportunities. 4. Lied about her age. She claimed to be 34 but turned out to be 54 when we photocopied her ID card. 5. Lied about having a valid work visa. I swear to God, if you have something down there about being good at Excel, I can find out in about 5 seconds if you are lying, and that's about half the people I've interviewed. Define good at Excel, cause not everyone is a macro whiz kid. Many years ago I worked as a junior programmer for a web development group that was part of a larger company. We had posted a position for a more experienced programmer and HR sent my manager several resumes. One of the candidates came in for the interview and my manager quickly realized she did not have the education or skills she claimed to have on her resume. Despite passing the initial HR qualifications, she cut the interview short and then called HR to complain. When HR looked into it, they found out that the degree listed on her resume didn't come from a legitimate university, but a degree mill. Not really a lie, but I saw election clerk on someone's resume under work experience. Having done that a number of times, I know that for most people it's a one-day job. I see a lot of people claiming degrees they don't have, the funniest being a guy that said he had a degree in computer engineering from an unaccredited diploma mill Bible college. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.